Hi, I'm Stephen Orange. Today we're going to be making a tabletop succulent garden, which is a great project for the summer because succulents are so easy. They're going to survive outside all summer, and then when cold weather comes, you can take them inside and keep them as houseplants. We're going to start with the best kind of dish for this. You want a wide, shallow dish or a bowl. You can also use like a more of a kind of deep plate. What you want to look for mainly is the drainage hole. Succulents like great drainage. If you have a dish that you really want to use, it could even be like a kitchen dish. If it doesn't have a hole, just when you water or if it's rained outside, just kind of put your hand and tip out the extra water and the succulents will be really happy. So add in a nice layer of pebbles. Then you also want to use a soil mix that has lightening agents in it, kind of like perlite, sand, peat moss, any of the above. I'll just drop it in here. Put a few inches in and leave some space so that you can add your plants in. And then I always start with kind of my favorite, like this beautiful echeveria. It has two colors and a great pattern. And a lot of succulents will send out these little pups that you can leave for a while, and then if you want to clip it off and put it in another planter, you'll have a whole other round of that beautiful succulent growing. These silver ones are really nice. Be careful when you handle succulents. They're really fragile because they're full of water. That's why they're called succulents. The leaves retain water. They're generally from drier places. If a whole stem snaps off, just grab it and poke it in the soil. It'll keep growing. Pull them out. You'll see the roots. Sometimes the roots are really thick like this, but all you have to do is just kind of break it up a little bit. That tells the plant, I'm outside my pot and I'm ready to go enjoy a larger space. So as I'm making this, I'm just going to keep adding different colors and textures. Succulents are fun because they come in so many varieties. I just pick them for color and for texture. Here's a really nice silver one that has a fuzzy texture. While you're making your dish garden, it's a good idea, just keep rotating it around so that you can keep adding things. When you're planting the succulents as well, you don't have to put them too deep. If they're kind of up above the soil a little bit, it'll be fine. In fact, some of the succulents will like that additional drainage. You don't need to fertilize succulents. You really don't want them to grow too quickly. You want them to have kind of a slower growth. Once you've planted your garden, you don't really have to worry about much care. Water them maybe once a week, depending on the environment. When they're in your house, I sometimes would do it every 2 weeks almost. When you're outdoors and it's hot August, you might want to do it every 5 days. The best way to tell when to water a succulent garden is to put your finger into the soil, half of your finger deep, and you'll see if it's dry as a bone, that means water. If it's moist at all, don't water. Once your succulents are all planted, they make a really great presentation. It's almost like a little mini garden or a mini landscape. You can also add things like a stone or something so that it feels even more like a desert landscape. Really, you're just celebrating all the beautiful colors and textures of the succulents, and they practically take care of themselves. And there you have it, an easy tabletop succulent garden to enjoy all summer long. Hi, I'm Stephen Orange. Today we're talking about houseplants, and houseplants have never been more popular. They're everywhere on social media. People love decorating with them in their homes, and all that love for houseplants sometimes has a dark side, which is we love our houseplants too much. And one way we really do that is we overwater. Houseplants are plants that obviously come from the wild. Most of them come from subtropical or tropical areas of the world that kind of mimic our own comfort level. So that's why houseplants have found a place in our heated homes during the winter especially. And that comes from Victorian times when internal heat was kind of perfected inside people's homes. Houseplants love the same temperatures mostly that we like. They like the same kind of range of 60s and 70s that we like. But what they don't like in our homes is all that excessive dryness. So that's why sometimes people end up overwatering their plants. The problem with overwatering is the soil moisture, but what the plant is really wanting is air moisture. So if you live in a house that really is a very modern home, the air can be quite dry, it can be pretty much sealed. It's good to find a place away from heating sources, away from a radiator if you happen to have radiators, away from any sort of forced air. Keep that away from your plants. You're going to see signs of browning on the end of the leaves when they're too dry. We have right here, I'd say right here in the front is a pothos. It's what I call the office plant. So often when you walk around people's offices, you see these dangling. Sometimes you can tell how long a person has worked there by how long the pop houseplant is. They tend to get really long. I've seen people string them all around their room in their apartment. They can be, you know, dozens of feet long sometimes. It's a really long vining plant. I think out of almost all houseplants, it puts up with the most neglect. It can go a long time without being watered. It can have bright sun or low sun. I wouldn't put it in direct sun, but it's something that seems like one of the most forgiving of all houseplants is pothos. A peace lily or a peace plant, these will have, usually during the summer, a white kind of hooded flower that comes up, kind of like an anthurium, and they're very beautiful. This one has a little subtle variegation on it with some white streaks. Often they're just plain green with the white flowers. This is a very easy plant. You'll see this in a lot of offices as well. Another plant that's more in the succulent family is a sansevieria, and this is also called snake plant. Its other old colloquial name is mother-in-law's tongue, but snake plant is more used now, and this is the common variety with these big swords of variegated leaves. There's also other more unusual types. This is one I have that I really like. It's a mini version. It doesn't get much taller than this. You can see it has very similar leaves, but they're much thinner, and they're also just this nice kind of dwarf height. Succulents, as we know, are good in the house if you have enough sun for most of them. Sansevierias do okay in the shade. Another succulent that does okay with some shade is a jade plant. This is a little tiny, not a normal jade plant, is a tiny little kind of dwarf jade plant as well. I like the way it looks like a bonsai. Jade plants are really forgiving and easy. They can get very large and very old in their pots. House plants can live for many, many decades. The other one that's very common, and this has a lot of different types of shapes and sizes and leaf colors, is a corn plant or Dracaena. This is one that's a shorter variety right now. Sometimes they get quite tall. You may see in an office building or a lobby, sometimes you'll see this big cane with a stem and then these big green leaves on the top. That's a corn plant as well. Philodendrons are a real classic. Philodendrons right now with these nice, beautiful leaves. Monstera has a similar leaf, but it has holes in the middle. And philodendron and monstera are so popular right now that you see them a lot on social media as well. They're really in fashion right now. Another plant that I'm seeing a lot more is this money plant. As you can see, it has a beautiful leaf to it, almost like a schefflera. It also has a braided trunk. And you know, if I wanted to, I haven't gotten around to it, I can braid these stems to keep that braided trunk appearance coming up. This is a very popular plant in Asia. The reason it's called money plant, it's supposed to bring you good fortune and bring you financial good fortune as well. So sometimes you'll go into a business and see this plant, it'll have red ribbons on it and be by the cash register, for instance. So money plants are really easy to grow. They just like consistent water. So one way you're going to know that your houseplant is not happy is that you'll start to see little telltale signs. One of them would be yellowing of leaves. If you see yellowed leaves, it could mean you're overwatering. It could mean it's in too strong of sunlight. But what you want to do is make sure when you're watering that you're always watering a plant that's basically dry. You never want to have it where you're watering an already wet plant. So that's one way to avoid it. Good rule of thumb, actually it's kind of a good rule of finger, is put your finger in the pot down to the second knuckle, and if it's dry, water. If it's not dry, wait a couple of days or wait even longer before you water. As I said, air moisture is very important to most of them. They do come from often kind of jungly areas. You can mist them. Some people say that doesn't help as much, but I find misting does help. That would be kind of like a daily thing, or maybe in the morning or in the evening you might give them a little mist. And I would definitely do that in the winter when the house is closed in and you don't have any windows open. I tend to open windows near the houseplant when temperatures are well above 50 degrees. They really do like the fresh air. They like the air moisture from outside if you can provide them with that. One other problem is root space. Over the years, sometimes we kind of forget about our houseplants. We're so used to seeing them over in the corner or on a shelf. But they do need to be inspected to make sure they're not getting root bound. One way you do that is to take a plant. This is a spider plant. You know, it has all these great little spiders, or kind of airplane. It's called spider or airplane plant. It grows these great little plantlets that come off the end. But look you can tell that this one's a little unhappy. One way I know that is that the middle of it is so pale. There's two problems here, I'd say. One is that this one needs more sunlight. It needs a little bit of a brighter light situation. To me, it looks like it might be maybe put in too dark of a space. So I would move it, you know, not into direct sunlight. Most of these houseplants don't want to be in direct sunlight. They want to either be in bright, indirect sunlight or a few feet away from that. If your hand can cast a pretty strong shadow, that's called bright indirect sunlight inside your house. That's a good way to judge it. And perhaps the main problem with this plant is that it's root bound. So when you pull it out, the best way to check if your plant is root bound is to pull it out and kind of carefully look at it. This one I can see has a lot of roots ratio to the soil, the amount of soil. So I really think this one will benefit, especially when they start to circle. Like you see the bottom of it is now forming a circle. The roots are starting to encircle the plant. That means there's not enough soil. And one thing you keep in mind is every time you water, you're having erosion inside the pot. So the soil is leaving the pot through the bottom. So what we'll do is we'll take it out of the smaller pot. We're going to put it in a larger pot. Make sure that it has a hole in the bottom. I like all of my houseplants to have holes in the bottom of the pots. You'll see a lot of houseplant pots sold without holes, and I always find it a big challenge. It's very easy to get root rot when there's no drainage on the bottom. So we'll pull out the plug, which looks like that. Then we'll just add more soil on the bottom. So sometimes what I do is I put a little piece of an old chipped piece of terracotta or just maybe a little pebble on the bottom on top of the hole just to kind of slightly cover it, but then water can still get around. Then I'm going to try to just estimate how deep it should go. So you really do want to keep the surface of the plant basically the surface of your new soil. So I'm taking the surface of the existing pot, adding a couple of inches, and also you want to leave at least ½ an inch at the top of the plant to the rim of the pot. You want to have enough room to water, because if you plant this is a common mistake with people, they'll plant the pot all the way to the top and then there's nowhere for the water to go. You need that reservoir so that the water soaks in. So every time you're potting a plant, make sure you leave about ½ an inch or more at the top so that you get as much water as you can in there. So you just add all that soil around, it's very basic. And then if you want to clean this guy up a little bit, you can remove any of the yellow foliage that's here. This middle section, as I mentioned, where it's a little too pale, that will actually just have to happen naturally in the sun as it starts to darken up. Water it well once you've potted it. Also, maybe wait a little while and then add a very diluted amount of houseplant fertilizer so it really helps the plant kind of get some nutrients that way as well. Once you've done all that, your new plant's ready to go. It'll be happy in your new home. One thing I missed, don't put it in a really large pot. Only go up like a couple of inches, an inch or so in diameter on the new pot. That they seem to like that better. And then in a few years, you might have to repot this one, but it really will last for several years. You're going to have really healthy houseplants following these tips. And if I hear someone say, I have a black thumb, I always say to them, you have a green thumb, you just don't know it yet. We all need to just love our plants, but also not love them too much. Hi, I'm Stephen Orange. Today we're talking about decorating with houseplants, and I grew up in a house that was filled with houseplants. My mom loved them. She had them in the front window, the back window, the sunroom. So it's great to just be able to be surrounded by plants. I think it's more popular than ever. The past couple of years, people have really taken to houseplants again. It's having a big renaissance. And what we're going to talk about today is how you can decorate with these beautiful plants, how you can arrange them and layer them in your home, and also the best way to care for them so that they look their best. One of the best ways to decorate with these houseplants is to arrange them in groups. I like to use odd numbers. That's kind of a classic design technique where you're using either 3, 5, or 7. It just makes it less symmetrical. You want it to have kind of a casual feel. You don't want it to feel like if there's 4 items with 2 smalls and 2 bigs, it feels a little formal. Pick 3 different sizes. You could do small, medium, big. You could do something that's quite large, something that's quite small, all in a little group. So in this case, what's nice is also picking plants that have a nice contrast among themselves. So this ivy, which has a trailing effect, and then this kind of spiky corn plant, and then a cycad relative that has these big, beautiful sculptural graphic leaves, but has more of an upright growth is really great. Paying attention to kind of grouping colors together, like this silvery Chinese evergreen and kind of a philodendron with a silvery cast to it, and then a little fern, all kind of works together, and you can think how your pots relate as well, so that you have different glazes, but they kind of mimic a similar look, and then you kind of throw something off with a natural rattan. Or you can pick just one big plant. People love indoor trees or one large plant. Sometimes you have a houseplant that actually gets large on its own, like a Norfolk Island pine will get really tall over time, or a fiddle leaf fig will get really large. So one statement plant is also really great in a corner of a room. And even once you're in your own home, you want to group the plants that like to be together in like similar conditions. And I found that even when you group the plants together, they help each other. There's a little more humidity created, how the moisture is evaporating during the day and the night. And also you can put the plants that have similar light conditions and air temperature conditions in the same group. One other fun place to put plants is in the bathroom. If you have a shower window, you can put a fern in that window and basically almost never water it because it's getting splashed and also the air moisture from the shower. And one thing to think about, is your furniture. You don't want to harm your furniture with rings or with condensation circles. That's all a problem you can have, especially when you're using unglazed terracotta. That can really sweat on wood. You wouldn't want to put that right on wood. If you want to be super safe, you can use one of these houseplant saucers. They're not very attractive, but if you're in the right spot, they kind of disappear. Often I'll just use an old dish. That's the sort of thing that you just want to make sure you have the right plant in the right spot and you're not harming your furniture. And then if you want something else that's more decorative, you can use, there's a fancy French phrase for it, cache-pot, which actually means hidden pot in French. And cache-pots are something that's sold that is a pot that you put another pot in, and the main pot has no hole in the bottom. So for instance, this one, which is rattan that's been painted partly, has the nursery pot, which is basically it's going to be living in this. This is what you're going to take out and water. You can water that in the kitchen sink. You can put it in the shower. The other one, it has a liner inside that also helps. So this also protects the rattan. When you see a pot that's like this, you know that it shouldn't have contact with moisture and soil. So that's a great way to do it. And then another way to do it is to use a large decorative pot like this one, which is quite heavy, and you don't want to tote this back and forth to water it. You also don't want to water it in place, perhaps because maybe it's on a wood floor. You want to make sure there's no condensation. You can take out this center part and just take that. What I normally do is I water it in the sink, and maybe before work or at night, I put it in the sink, I water it really well, I leave it in the sink overnight, and then I put it back the next morning. Another thing I do with my plants is I give them kind of a spa day in the shower, and I'll take all the plants like from one area and just put them all in the bathtub and run the shower over them for a few minutes. It gets the dust off them, and also then I just shut the shower curtain or shower doors and I let them stay in there all day. I just think of it like a spa day for those houseplants. One other touch that you can do is, let's say that you do have the edge of the pot showing, or you want to make sure that the inside pot isn't showing. You could make sure the level of it's a bit lower, and then you could add moss or this decorative kind of tree moss that's dried on top, and that will just make the top of it look a lot nicer. For watering in general, it's pretty simple. I tend to water my houseplants about once a week. That's my general rule of thumb. Sometimes it's every week and a half. Sometimes if I'm on vacation and I just want to see who survives, I go 2 weeks, 2.5 weeks. That's a long time. I'm pretty much tough love on my plants. As we all heard, you can love your plants too much, and that generally involves overwatering. You want to water them really well, maybe about once a week, and that's about it, maybe a week and a half. So when you do that, that's why I like to remove them from whatever pot there is, so I don't have to underwater. I can just really thoroughly give them a good drink and let it drain and then put it back. Also for drainage, what you can do is, take a pebble from outside or a small rock, or I often keep if a terracotta pot breaks, I usually keep the shards. That's good to put in the bottom of the pot just to kind of keep all the soil from leaching out of the bottom of the pot that has a hole. Air humidity, that's one of the big problems with houseplants, is our interior of our home is so dry in the winter with either a radiator or forced air heater. So, regular misting is something you can do while you call your mom or your grandparents, and just be misting while you're on the phone is something you can do just to make those plants happy. Also, another tip is to take a saucer like this plastic one, or you could use a ceramic dish, and you just add a layer of pebbles here and fill that with just like 1/2 inch of water or 1/4 inch of water, and then you can place your plant on top, and that does help create kind of a humid atmosphere that most houseplants love. You don't need to do that with cactus or something that's important. So some of the problems you can telltale signs on your houseplants if you're having trouble is, when you start to see dried leaves, this ivy, most of the leaves are really healthy, but right over here you start to see some dried leaves. You might want to turn it over and look at it really carefully. Make sure there's no pests like spider mites or whitefly. Spider mites you can tell you'll see most houseplants, if you start to see anything sticky, like a sticky sap on there, if there's any stickiness to the touch, that means they do have some of these pests. So you'd have to figure out how you're going to handle that. It can be very challenging in an indoor environment, whether you're going to just try to brush them off with a strong jet of water, or whether you're going to use an insecticide, or whether you're going to use soap and water. There's a lot of different techniques. I tend to strategically try to do the least chemical one first and see where I get, and then if it requires something more, I might either use that chemical, or I might just try to get rid of the plant if it seems like it's too late to save and it's going to infect other plants. So just make your choices, but first thing, make sure there's no pests. The other thing would be to make sure that you're watering well. This sign to me is that these plants have probably been a little bit dry from either air moisture or underwatered slightly. So you might want to mist them a little more or move them away from a heater. Same with this fern. It's showing signs here on this leaf that maybe it's just been a little underwatered, or perhaps it's not getting enough air moisture. So you might just want to alter where it is in the house. I tend to move my plants a lot and try different spots for them. You don't have to treat your plants like furniture in the fact that they arrive in your home and then they stay that way for the next 20 years. You can actually move them around so you don't get bored with the way they look. One of the other things that's good to consider is if you need to repot. Most houseplants will go years in their pot, so you don't really have to worry about it. If you start to see signs of decline, then you do want to make sure that the plant has enough room. Sometimes you also see just a plant that's in a bad pot. So in this case, we went on a journey around the office, and we found this sad character. He's an aloe, and he's a little droopy, and we think he can be rescued. So we're today going to try to rescue this aloe, and aloes can get very large. This one may have been in this pot for a long time and just not grown very much because he didn't have much root room. So what we found was that this pot is inside a nursery pot that has almost no soil left, and then it's inside a little plastic pot. So what we would do is try to put it in a nice new pot, which is a little more appropriately scaled for the size of the aloe. So the first thing we'll do is look at the pot and make sure, especially for a succulent, it has good drainage. This one is a kind of pot you'll find in a lot of home centers where it has a drainage hole and then an attached tray. What I tend to do when I water with these is water, let it sit for a minute, and then make sure I dump all the water out of the tray. First of all, you don't want the tray sloshing everywhere. I usually do this in the kitchen sink, and then also it just helps, these sort of plants especially don't want to sit in standing water. So what I would do is add a rock over the hole, and then I would put in enough soil to get the plant to the right height. So to do that, I might try a couple of times by taking it out of so you can see there's hardly any soil left. This is almost all roots. And I want to make sure I pot this at the right level. So I'm going to put a little more soil in. And I'm using a well-draining potting soil. You can use one that's for succulents, and that'll be really good drainage. So that's about the right height. So I'm going to hold it there in the middle. And then I'm going to just add soil all around. And on rotating it so that the plant stays upright and doesn't flop over on one side. So on this one, I will tamp down the soil and also will water it in to make sure the soil is all firm around the plant and that the plant has enough spots to grow in. So once we have it planted, you can see it still looks a little sad. One of the things I think we should do first is cut off some of the leaves. So with some scissors, I'm just going to trim off all the leaves that look really kind of deflated. Succulents are really tough plants, but you can see that this guy is kind of at the end of he's tired of trying. So we're going to help him out. We're going to get rid of all these wilted, shriveled leaves on the bottom and give him a good dose of water. And I don't think he probably needs fertilizer. I just think he needs soil. And he looks a little funny now, but in a few months, actually, he'll really start to fill out. And if you put him in a bright spot, he'll be a beautiful plant. One other thing, if this is too much stem for you, you can let him kind of recover, and then you can start to bury him a little bit here or here so that he has more soil around, so there's not as much stem if that's not a look you like. So now that we have this guy back on the road to recovery, I just want to encourage everybody to give houseplants a try. They're actually so wonderful to work with. They're alive, they bring a sense of life to your home, and what a better way to decorate than with living things. I am Stephen Orr. Today we're going to talk about one of my favorite topics, houseplants. They're really sweeping the nation, if not the world, with their popularity. And one of the great things about these houseplants, especially these easy ones we have here on the table, is they're very easy to share with your friends. Just by taking simple cuttings, you can make whole new plants and give them to friends. That's called propagation. Today we're going to go through and talk about which plants work well for propagation. Some of the easiest ones are plants that already kind of grow quickly. Plants like maybe a Swedish ivy or a regular ivy. Coleus is a very good one to work with. This is also a plant that does well outside in the summertime. Scented geraniums are really easy to propagate. If you don't know about scented geraniums, they're grown more for their fragrance than their flowers, but they still come in very beautiful leaf colors as well. And they're very, very easy to propagate. What I think is the easiest way to propagate houseplants is in water. There's just a couple of things you need to keep in mind. We've had this one in here. This is an ivy. We've had it in its glass bottle for about 2 weeks. And you know, we could, the little white roots are showing up here in the glass, and that's how you know that the plant is ready to plant. One thing you need to keep in mind is if you leave your cuttings in water for too long, the roots actually get kind of acclimatized to water and they're not ready for soil. So what I would suggest is about ½ an inch of roots is about the most you need to go ahead and plant your houseplant. Any longer than that and you're endangering the roots not being able to adjust to soil. Once you pull the plant out, and I'll show you, just pull it out like this, you can see all these nice healthy roots. And then what you'll do is you'll just place them right in a pot like this and keep this evenly moist. If you're worried about you know, dry conditions in your house, you can go ahead and put a plastic bag over this and create kind of your own little mini greenhouse. If you're worried about the fragility of the leaves, you can put some chopsticks or pencils in here and create kind of a little tent. Do not put this in direct sunlight at all. It will fry your plant. Keep this just kind of in indirect light. Let it kind of have moisture. It will condense in here, and that's all a good sign that you're keeping it nice and moist. You'll know that the plant is ready when you come and you tug on it and it doesn't give. This one's not ready because I can pull it right out. But if you wanted to test it, you just tug lightly, and if it's giving you resistance, that means it's growing roots. Once the roots are well established, this thing is ready to be given away to somebody. You could grow it on to be a little bit bigger and put it in a larger pot. Besides the water method, another way to do this is to do just a rooted cutting without water and do it in soil. That's easy to do with scented geraniums or different kinds of ivy or coleus like we spoke of before. What I do is cut off a few inches of the plant, about maybe 3 or 4 inches. And then what you do is just pull off the lower leaves, leaving only a few leaves at the top. Just pinch those off, and actually it smells great because it's a scented geranium. So then what I do is I take this with a very clean scissors, and you should disinfect your cutting shears before you use them here. Take simple potting soil in a little pot, and then you take rooting hormone, which you can buy at any nursery, and this just helps the plant root. It's a hormone that signals to the plant that it's time to put out some roots. You can see the white powder right there. And then so it doesn't all come off, you put a pencil inside the soil, and then you have a hole that you can just put the soil around. Moisten it well, and then do as we did with the water cuttings and put it inside a plastic bag like a little mini greenhouse. Leave it there, check it every few days. When you can tug on that and get some resistance, you know that it's growing roots. So one final very easy way to divide houseplants, and this only works on certain plants, and you can go online and kind of research which ones it would be because there's a pretty big list, but one way to kind of tell is to look for houseplants where it tends to send up different little branches of the plant at ground level. Sometimes these little baby plants are called pups depending on the plant, and what you're really doing is pulling this plant and very carefully pulling it apart to make more than one plant. So let's say this plant was really quite large. You could even do it with a large plant and come away with some large plants, or you could have a large plant that has small pups like this at the bottom that you just kind of gingerly pull off. The key is to make sure you get the leaves, the stem, and the root on each pull apart. So what we're going to do on this one, at foreign plant, is pull it out of its pot, and then we're going to look at it. Oh, see, it's ready to roll. It's ready to split. And you just look at it and you see where it naturally comes apart without too much resistance. I can see that this one right here If I just break it slightly, I get roots on either end, slightly less roots here, slightly more roots here. And then on this one, I can pull it into, let's see, there's one with roots, and that's with roots too. So basically you have about 5 plants here that you can pot up, and what you would do is just take this one and put it right back into this pot, and then take the others and put them into similar sized pots, water them well, treat them a little carefully, make sure they don't dry out where they get new roots going. Start to add a little bit of houseplant fertilizer as the weeks go by, and you're going to have 5 plants where you used to have 1. So thanks to easy propagation like these techniques, you can have a jungle of houseplants in your own home, and you can share them with all your friends.